The night I finally said something, I hadn't planned to say anything at all. That was always my way with my family. Absorb it, smile through it, drive home alone and let it dissolve somewhere on I-40 with the radio up loud. I had been doing that my whole life, 35 years of it. I was good at it, but that Christmas something shifted. Maybe it was because Daniel had been gone for 6 weeks by then and I was still waking up at 3 a.m., reaching for a person who wasn't there anymore. Maybe it was because I was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Whatever it was, when my brother opened his mouth at that dinner table, something in me went very still, and the part of me that usually said, just let it go, didn't say anything at all. So I put down my drink, and I spoke. I'll get to what happened after that. But first you need to understand what kind of family I was sitting in the middle of when it happened. My mother's name is Patrice. She lives in a colonial revival on the east side of Knoxville, in a neighborhood where the lawns are always edged and the Christmas lights go up the week before Thanksgiving. She's 63 years old, sharp, immaculate, and she has spent most of my adult life making me feel like I am somehow behind schedule on a life she designed for me without asking. My brother's name is Cody. He's 39, 2 years older than me, and he has always been the one she built the stories around. Cody, who played college football. Cody, who runs his own contracting business. Cody, who gave her 2 grandchildren and a daughter-in-law she can take to church without having to explain anything. I am Elena Voss. I run a small interior design studio out of a rented space in the Marble Springs neighborhood. I've been doing it for 8 years. I have a client list I'm proud of, a reputation that took me a decade to build, and a life that, until 6 weeks before that dinner, felt, quietly, like exactly enough. The thing the family didn't know about my life was the most important part of it. His name was Daniel Whitfield. He was 41 years old, a structural engineer who worked for a firm in Nashville, and he was the most careful, funny, quietly devoted person I had ever met. We got married 3 years ago at the Botanical Garden in a ceremony with 14 people, his colleagues, my friend Audra, his sister Bev, and my Aunt Ruth Ann, who had driven down from Bristol without telling anyone else in the family she was coming. We didn't tell my mother. We didn't tell Cody. I know how that sounds. But if you knew how it went the first time I brought Daniel to a family function, the pointed questions about his background, my mother's particular brand of polite dismissal, Cody's handshake that lingered 1 second too short, you might understand why I eventually stopped trying to make them see what I saw. I chose Daniel. I just stopped asking them to choose him too. So for 3 years I was married. Fully, happily, privately married. Daniel came home to Tennessee on weekends when he could. We spent Tuesday nights on the phone for an hour before bed. We had inside jokes about the Memphis IKEA and a running disagreement about whether Dollywood counted as a legitimate anniversary destination. We had a life. Then, in October, Daniel went in for what his doctor called a routine cardiac screening. Nothing about what followed was routine. He was gone by the 1st of November. 6 weeks before Christmas, an arrhythmia they hadn't caught, a hospital room in Nashville, and then a phone call at 6 in the morning that I have not been able to think about directly since it happened. I didn't tell my family. I didn't know how to explain a loss they didn't know I'd had. If you're watching from Tennessee, or anywhere else this kind of family dynamic feels a little too familiar, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. And if you stay for the whole story, I think you'll find it worth your time. Subscribing helps more than you know. The Christmas dinner was at my mother's house, December 23rd. She does it the day before Christmas Eve because, as she has always said, it gives her Christmas Eve to herself. What she actually means is that it gives her a day to recover from us. There were 12 people at that table. My mother at the head, Cody and his wife Tara across from me, their kids running between the kitchen and the living room, my Uncle Pete and his girlfriend, Cody's in-laws, who I had met twice, my Aunt Ruth Ann, who had driven down again and who kept giving me looks I was too tired to interpret. I had almost not come. I had stood in my kitchen that afternoon in my coat with my keys in my hand, running the math on whether I could plausibly claim I was sick, but Aunt Ruth Ann had called me that morning and said, "I'll be there. You should be there too." There was something in her voice I couldn't read, so I went. Dinner was the way it always was. My mother's brisket, which is genuinely good. Football on in the background. Cody holding court about a commercial project his crew had just finished in Gatlinburg. Tara refilling wine glasses and asking me surface-level questions about my studio that she didn't actually listen to the answers to. It's fine, I told myself. 2 hours. Then home. We were maybe 40 minutes in when Cody raised his glass for what he called a toast. To everyone at this table, he said, grinning. Married, unmarried. And he looked straight at me when he said it. And Elena, who keeps us humble. A few people laughed, the easy, automatic laugh of a table that has heard this man make this kind of joke before. 35 and still single, he said, shaking his head with a smile that was almost fond. Wow, Christmas must get pretty lonely. There it was. The thing that was always there, just usually quieter. I looked at my mother. She caught my eye. She smiled, a small, apologetic, we're all family smile, and said, "He's just joking, Elena," as though I didn't know what joking sounded like, as though this didn't happen every single time. The table settled back into itself. Someone asked Cody something about the Gatlinburg project. A child knocked over a cup. My Uncle Pete laughed at something on his phone, and I sat there with my hand around my wine glass, and I felt something I had never quite felt before in that room. Not anger exactly, something quieter than anger and more dangerous. He doesn't know, I thought. None of them know. I set my glass down on the table. Not hard, not dramatically. I just set it down and I let the sound of it be the only thing I did for 1 full second. Then I said, in a voice that came out calmer than I expected, "Don't worry about me. I've been married for a long time." The table didn't go quiet all at once. It went quiet in a wave. First Cody, then Tara, then my mother, who had been mid-sentence with my Uncle Pete, and simply stopped. She looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not anger, not confusion, something closer to fear. "What did you say?" she asked. I said I've been married, I told her, for 3 years. My Aunt Ruth Ann, across the table, set down her fork very slowly. She didn't look surprised. She looked like a woman who had been waiting for a door to open and was now watching it happen. My mother's wine glass was still raised. She hadn't finished the toast. "Elena?" Her voice was careful, in a way that meant she was already constructing something. "What are you?" His name was Daniel, I said. Was. I hadn't meant to use past tense. It just came out, and the moment it did, I watched my mother's face do something complicated, watched her try to process the tense of that verb, while the rest of the table held completely still. "Was," Cody repeated. Slowly. "He died 6 weeks ago," I said. "November 1st. Nobody spoke. And then my mother set her glass down on the table and said, in a voice I will never forget for as long as I live, "Why didn't you tell us you were married?" She asked it like I was the one who had done something wrong. And that was the moment I understood, finally, completely, that this was never going to be about Daniel. It was never going to be about my grief. It was going to be about what I had kept from her, what I had chosen, what I had decided she didn't deserve to know. That night, driving home on I-40 with the Knoxville skyline going dark behind me and my hands very steady on the wheel, I thought about the question she'd asked. Why didn't you tell us? I thought about all the things I knew about this family that they assumed I didn't know. And I thought about the answer that was sitting in a manila folder in Daniel's filing cabinet, the one I had found 3 days earlier when I was going through his papers, the one that had made me sit down on the floor of his home office and stay there for a very long time. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had stopped shaking. By the time I unlocked my front door, something had shifted in me that I don't know how to name. I did know one thing. My mother's question deserved an answer, just not the one she was expecting. I didn't go back to my mother's house for 3 weeks. She called twice in the days after Christmas. I let both calls go to voicemail and then sat with my phone face down on the kitchen counter, listening to the silence after the vibrating stopped. The messages were short. The first one asked me to call her when I was ready to talk. The second one said she hoped I was doing okay and that she didn't want things to be strange between us. Strange. as though strange was the word for what was happening. Cody didn't call at all. That didn't surprise me. Cody never called when he'd done something worth apologizing for. He waited until enough time had passed that the incident had technically expired, and then he showed up at the next family event as though the calendar had absolved him. Tara, his wife, sent a text 4 days after Christmas. "Elena, thinking of you. If you need anything, don't hesitate." I stared at it for a while. The kind of text you send when you want the record to show you tried. The only person I talked to was Aunt Ruth Ann. She drove back up to Bristol the morning after the dinner but called me from the road, and we stayed on the phone for almost 2 hours while she crossed the Cumberland Plateau, and I sat in Daniel's armchair in his home office with my knees pulled up, not crying, just listening to her voice. She had loved Daniel. She was the only one in my family who had met him more than once, who had sat across a dinner table from him and talked to him like a person, and come away saying, "Elena, that man is the real thing." She was at our wedding. She cried during the vows. She sent us a hand-thrown ceramic bowl from a potter she knew in Jonesboro with a card that said, "A marriage needs something beautiful in the center of it." That bowl was on Daniel's kitchen table when I found him gone. "Your mother is going to make this about herself," Ruth Ann told me, "somewhere near Cookville. I want you to be ready for that." "I know," I said. "And Cody is going to do what Cody does, which is absolutely nothing useful." "I know." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Did you find everything in his files?" I went still. "What do you know about his files?" She paused just long enough that I noticed it. "Daniel mentioned to me once that he was organized, that he kept records of everything. He said it in a way that felt like more than small talk." I looked at the filing cabinet across the room. Gray steel, 4 drawers, Daniel's handwriting on each label, small and precise. He was organized, that was one way to put it. I had found the folder on a Tuesday, 9 days after he died. I'd gone to his house, our house, technically, though I'd always thought of it as his, because he'd bought it before we met, to start going through his paperwork. His sister Bev had already handled the immediate things, the hospital paperwork, the death certificates, but the personal files, the financial records, the legal documents, those were waiting for me. I almost didn't open the bottom drawer. I almost left it for another day, another version of myself that felt more capable of absorbing information without coming apart. But Daniel had labeled everything, and the bottom drawer said personal/legal, property in his careful hand, and I thought, I need to know what we have. The first folder was the deed to the house. The second was our marriage certificate. He'd kept a copy, separate from mine, in a clear sleeve. The third was a folder labeled WB Holdings LLC that I almost set aside before I noticed my brother's name inside it. Cody Raymond Voss, borrower. I sat down on the floor. The document was a private loan agreement dated 9 years ago, drafted by a Nashville attorney and signed by both Daniel and Cody. $182,000. Issued to Cody Voss personally to stabilize what the document described as significant operational debt in his contracting business. The loan carried a modest interest rate. There was a repayment schedule that, based on the payment history stapled behind it, Cody had followed for approximately 14 months before the payments stopped. At the bottom of the last page, as a witness signature, was my mother's name, Patrice Ann Voss. She had been in that room. She had watched my husband sign a document lending my brother nearly $200,000, and then she had signed her name to it, and then she had come to every subsequent family dinner and looked at Daniel, when he was there, in the early days before I stopped bringing him, with that particular expression she had, the one that meant, "You're a guest here and don't forget it." I sat on that floor for a long time. She knew who he was. That was the thought that kept circling. She knew exactly who he was, what he had done for her son, and she still treated him like an inconvenience. The next folder was property records. Daniel's home, the one I was sitting in, was in his name. But there was a second property in the file, a commercial building on Merchants Drive in Knoxville, held under the WB Holdings LLC, currently leased to a tenant, operating a contracting and renovation business. I pulled up the lease agreement. The tenant was Cody Voss, DBA Voss Built, LLC. My brother had been renting his primary business location from my husband's LLC for 6 years. The rent was $1,100 a month. He had been writing that check or scheduling that transfer every single month, and at no point had he known, or apparently tried to find out, whose name was at the top of the ownership structure. He paid Daniel, I thought. For 6 years he paid Daniel, and he came to Christmas dinner and made jokes about my life. I called Daniel's attorney on a Thursday morning in January. His name was Warren Gill, and he operated out of a small firm in the Bearden neighborhood. I had met him once before at the closing on the Merchants Drive property. He was 60, methodical, with a way of speaking that made you feel like every sentence had been checked for accuracy before it left his mouth. I told him I had been through the files. I expected you'd get there, he said. I was wondering when you'd call. The LLC? I said. WB Holdings. What happens to it now? It transfers to you entirely. You were named as sole successor in the operating agreement, the loan receivable, the property, the lease. All of it passes to you. There are no other claims. I looked out the window at the bare January trees along my street, WB. I had assumed it stood for something corporate, a placeholder name. But sitting there on the phone, I realized. Whitfield, Bowman. Daniel's middle name was Bowman. WB Holdings. He built this, and he named it after himself, and he left it to me. There's also a letter, Warren said. He left it with me last August. He asked me to give it to you directly, not mail it, give it to you in person. My throat tightened. He wrote it in August? He did. A pause. He'd gotten some results he was concerned about. He didn't want to alarm you before he knew more. But he wanted to be prepared, end quote. I closed my eyes. He knew something was coming, and he didn't tell me so I wouldn't be afraid. Even at the end, he was managing my fear before his own. I'd like to come in, I said. This week, if you can. I'll make the time, Warren said. I went on a Friday. Warren's office smelled like old coffee and carpet and paper, which I found reassuring. He handed me the letter across his desk in an envelope with my name on it, Elena, in Daniel's handwriting, the E looping slightly the way it always did. I didn't open it there. I held it in my lap and asked Warren everything I needed to know about the loan, the property, my legal position. He answered carefully, completely. Before I left, he said, he talked about you when he came in to update the documents last summer. He looked at me steadily. He wanted to make sure you were never in a position where you needed anyone's help who hadn't earned the right to give it. I didn't trust myself to respond to that. I just nodded and put on my coat. I read the letter that night, in Daniel's armchair, with the lamp on and the heat running and the ceramic bowl on the table in my eyeline. It was 3 pages. His handwriting, unhurried, exactly like him. He wrote about the house and what he wanted me to do with it. He wrote about Bev and how much he hoped I'd stay close to her. He wrote about the LLC, plainly and specifically, so there would be no confusion. And then, near the end, he wrote, I know you've been carrying your family for a long time without them knowing it. I know that's exhausting. I'm not asking you to burn anything down, but I also don't want you to keep paying a debt you never agreed to. You'll know what the right thing looks like when you see it. You always do. I read that paragraph 4 times. Then I folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, and held it against my chest for a while. You'll know what the right thing looks like. By that point, I had a pretty good idea. But I also knew that whatever I was going to do, I couldn't do it from grief. I couldn't do it from the hollow, sleepless, raw place I was living in. I had to wait until I was steady, until the thing I was building was stronger than the thing I was angry about. So I waited. I went back to work. I took a new client, a couple, redesigning a Victorian in 4th and Gill, and I poured myself into the fabric samples and the floor plans and the sourcing calls. I had lunch with Audra twice. I slept more. I let January become February, and I watched. Because here's what grief does that people don't tell you. It makes you very, very quiet. And when you're quiet long enough, you start to hear things. I heard that Cody's business had hit a rough patch. A Gatlinburg project had gone sideways. Material costs, a subcontractor dispute, something about permits. Tara had mentioned it to a mutual friend, who mentioned it to Audra. Cody was stretched. I heard that my mother had been telling people, her church friends, her neighbor Linda, that I had surprised everyone at Christmas with the news of a marriage she hadn't been told about. The way she framed it, I was the one who had kept a secret. I was the one who had been difficult. She wasn't wrong, technically. But she was leaving out the reason. The reason was sitting in a manila folder in Warren Gill's office, with her signature at the bottom. It was a Tuesday in late February when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go, but something made me answer. Elena Voss? A man's voice, careful. My name is Doug Faber. I'm the loan officer at First Tennessee who handles accounts for Voss Built LLC. I sat very still. Okay, I'm calling because we've received documentation from your attorney's office indicating a transfer of a significant receivable to your name. We're updating our records and I just wanted to confirm. Yes, I said. That's correct. A pause. Ms. Voss, I want to make sure you're aware there are some implications here for Mr. Voss's existing credit arrangements with us. The loan being called or reclassified could affect. I understand, I said. I'm not calling the loan. Another pause. Longer this time. You're not. Not yet, I said. I just want to make sure the records are accurate. I hung up and sat for a moment. Not yet. The word had surprised me when it came out of my mouth, but it felt exactly right. I picked up my phone again and texted Warren. I think I'm ready to talk about next steps. He responded in 4 minutes. I had a feeling. Come in Monday. I put my phone down and looked at the ceramic bowl on the table. A marriage needs something beautiful in the center of it. What Daniel had built, quietly, carefully, over years, I was just beginning to understand the full shape of it. And so was everyone else. March in Knoxville comes in hesitant. Some days feel almost like spring, the red buds starting to color along the hillsides, the air carrying something warmer than it has any right to yet. Other days you wake up and the sky is flat and gray, and the temperature has dropped back into the 30s, and you remember that the season isn't finished deciding. I felt like that in March. Almost there, not quite, but I had a plan. It started with an invitation. I had Warren draft a simple letter, not from his office, just from me, on plain paper, in my own words. I sent it to my mother's address on a Monday morning in the first week of March, and I sent a copy by text to Cody because I knew he'd hear about it from her within the hour anyway. The letter said, I know Christmas was hard for everyone. I've had some time to sit with things, and I think I owe you a real conversation. Not a phone call, something where we're actually in the same room. I'd like to have you all to dinner at my place on Saturday the 22nd. I'll cook. I just want to talk, and I want to share some things about Daniel that I never got the chance to share while he was alive. I hope you'll come. I read it over 3 times before I sent it. It was warm. It was gentle. It gave them nothing to refuse without looking like they were refusing to grieve with me. My mother called that same evening. Elena, her voice had the careful softness she used when she was trying to seem like the reasonable one. I'm so glad you reached out. I've been worried about you. I'm okay, I said. I just think it's time. I think so too. A pause. Will it just be us, or you, Cody and Tara and Aunt Ruth Ann? Another pause. Slightly longer. Ruth Ann. She was at the wedding, I said simply. She knew him. I think she should be there. My mother said, of course, in the tone she used when she meant the opposite of course. We hung up and I stood in my kitchen for a moment, listening to the quiet. She'll tell Cody tonight, I knew that, and Cody, stretched thin from the Gatlinburg situation, already rattled by the letter Warren's office had sent to his bank, would spend the next 2.5 weeks trying to figure out what I knew and how much of it I was planning to say out loud. Good. Let him spend those weeks in his own head. I had things to do. The first call I made was to Bev. Daniel's sister lived in Murfreesboro, 40 minutes outside Nashville. She was 44, a high school vice principal, with her brother's same careful way of listening before she spoke. We had talked several times since November. She was one of the only people in the world who understood what I had actually lost, because she had lost it too. I told her what I'd found in the files. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. He never told me the details, she said finally. He told me he'd help someone in your family. He didn't say who or how much. He wouldn't have, I said. That was Daniel. What are you going to do? I'm not sure yet, I said, which was partially true. I knew the broad shape of it. I just hadn't finished working out every piece. I wanted you to know before anything happened. You deserved to know. He loved you, she said. Her voice caught slightly, then steadied. Whatever you decide, he would have trusted you to decide it. After we hung up, I sat with that for a while. He would have trusted you. I held on to that. The second call was to Audra. Audra Lee Pemberton had been my closest friend since we'd shared a studio space in the warehouse district 8 years ago, back when we were both young enough to think exposed brick was worth the heating bill. She was blunt in the way that only people who genuinely love you can afford to be, and she had disliked Cody from the one time she'd met him at a family barbecue 4 years ago. He made a joke about my car, she had told me afterward. I don't forgive that. I told her about the dinner. I told her about the loan documents and the building on Merchants Drive and the letter from Warren's bank contact. She listened without interrupting, which for Audra was an act of genuine restraint. When I finished, she said, "What do you need from me?" "I need someone to help me carry the thing I'm going to put in the center of that table," I said. She didn't ask what the thing was, she just said, "Tell me when and where." I want to tell you something about the 3 weeks between sending that letter and the dinner. I did not spend them angry. I know that might be hard to understand. I had every reason to be angry. I had the documentation, the timeline, the signatures. I had a mother who had watched my husband sign a 6-figure loan to her son and then spent 3 years treating him like he didn't belong in the room. I had a brother who had joked about my loneliness at a Christmas table while his business operated out of a building my husband owned. But anger is loud, and what I was building required quiet. Maybe you've been in a place like that, where you knew something and the only power you had was in how long you waited before you said it, where the discipline of not reacting was the whole strategy. So instead of anger, I worked. I went back to Warren and we went through everything methodically. The loan balance, with the stopped payments and 9 years of modest interest, was now sitting at just over $206,000. The property on Merchants Drive was assessed at $412,000. Cody's monthly rent was $1,100. He had been a tenant for 6 years, which meant he had paid Daniel's LLC just under $79,000 over the course of the lease, none of which had been applied to the loan because the loan and the lease were separate instruments. He owed me more than $200,000. He rented his business premises from me, and he had no idea about either of those things. Warren walked me through my options with the patience of someone who understood that I wasn't just asking legal questions. "You could call the loan immediately," he said. "Given the default on the repayment schedule, you have standing. I know. You could also convert the property lease to a month-to-month and adjust the rate to market value. Current commercial rates on Merchants Drive are closer to $1,700. I know that too." He looked at me. "What do you actually want to do, Elena?" I thought about Daniel's letter. "I'm not asking you to burn anything down. I want to give him a choice," I said. "I want him to understand the full picture first, and then I want to give him a choice." Warren nodded slowly. "And your mother?" I was quiet for a moment. "My mother's part is different. The week before the dinner, I did one thing I hadn't told anyone I was going to do. I found an old photo on my phone, one that Ruthann had taken at our wedding. Daniel and me, outside under the pergola at the botanical garden, right after the ceremony. He was looking at me. I was laughing at something he'd just said. It was the most unguarded photo I had of myself in years. I posted it on a Tuesday evening. No caption, just the image. I turned my phone face down and went to bed. By morning, there were over 300 comments. People who had worked with Daniel at his firm, former clients of mine who had met him at studio events, his students from the guest lectures he did at UT, his sister Bev, his college roommate writing a paragraph I had to stop reading halfway through because I wasn't ready to feel that much. And somewhere in that flood of responses, I knew my mother and Cody were reading. They were seeing who Daniel Whitfield was. They were seeing it in the words of people who had actually known him, loved him, been changed by him. They were seeing what they had chosen not to see when it mattered. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I'd saved under Cody's name. 3 words, "We need to talk." I put the phone down. I had a dinner to prepare. I did not respond to Cody's text, but 2 days later he called. I answered this time because I needed to hear where he was. He opened with small talk, the weather, something about a job in Maryville, and I let him do it, listening to the forced easiness in his voice, the way he was working up to something. "That photo you posted," he finally said, "it got a lot of attention." It did. "People are saying I didn't realize he was so—" He stopped, started again. "I didn't know much about him, I guess." "No," I said, "you didn't." Silence. "Elena." His voice shifted. The small talk was gone. "I got a letter from Warren Gill's office a few weeks back, about some kind of loan. Here it is, okay? It says the receivable transferred to you. I need to understand what that means. Because my banker called and, Cody," I kept my voice even, "come to dinner Saturday. We can talk about everything then." A pause, long enough that I could hear him breathing. Are you going to? He couldn't finish the sentence because he didn't know which version of it to be afraid of. "Saturday," I said. "Bring Tara if you want." I hung up. I stood in my kitchen and looked at the ceramic bowl on the counter. I'd brought it over from Daniel's house in February. Couldn't leave it there anymore. And I breathed. "He's scared." I could hear it in every word he hadn't said. He had spent 2 weeks running scenarios in his head, and none of them ended the way the last decade had. The one where he was the successful brother, the one with the thriving business and the family and the position in the family story. That version was over. He just didn't know the shape of what was replacing it yet. The Thursday before the dinner, Ruth Ann arrived from Bristol. She had offered to come early, and I had said yes without hesitation. I needed her in that house before anyone else arrived. I needed one person in the room who had loved Daniel without complication. She came through my front door with a casserole dish and her reading glasses pushed up on her head, and she held me for a long time in the hallway without saying anything. Then she pulled back and looked at me. "You look steadier than I expected," she said. "I feel steadier than I expected." She studied me for another moment. Then she nodded once, like something had been confirmed. "Show me what you need me to do," she said. I brought her to the dining room table. In the center of it, I had placed Daniel's wedding album, the one Bev had given me last month, photographs she had printed and bound herself, 60 pages of a day that had happened and been real and been beautiful and that my family had not been invited to. Ruth Ann sat down and opened it slowly. She turned the pages without speaking. When she got to the photo of the 2 of us under the pergola, she pressed her hand flat against the page and kept it there for a moment. "He was so happy that day," she said quietly. "I know." She looked up at me. "Do you know what you're going to say Saturday?" "Not all of it," I said honestly. "But I know how it starts." She closed the album, folded her hands on top of it. "Then that's enough," she said. Saturday morning arrived cold and clear, the sky that specific shade of pale Tennessee blue that shows up in early spring, like a promise the season isn't ready to keep yet. I cooked all morning, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans with almonds the way Daniel used to make them. I set the table properly, my good dishes, cloth napkins, candles, not because I wanted the evening to feel warm exactly, but because Daniel deserved to be honored in a room that looked like someone had cared. Ruth Ann sat at the kitchen island with a cup of coffee and kept me company while I cooked, and we talked about small things, her garden, a show we'd both been watching, a potter friend of hers who had a new studio, and the ease of it settled something in me. At 4:30, I went to my room, changed into a dark green dress Daniel had always liked, and stood in front of the mirror for a moment. "This is for you," I thought. All of it. At 5 o'clock, Ruth Ann went to the dining room and placed the wedding album in the center of the table, exactly where I'd asked her to. At 5:15, headlights swept across my front window. My mother's car, 2 minutes later, Cody's truck pulled in behind it. I took a breath. I walked to the front door. I opened it before anyone could knock. My mother stood on my porch in her good wool coat, holding a bottle of wine she'd brought as an offering. Behind her, Cody stood with his hands in his jacket pockets, and when his eyes met mine, I saw it, the thing I'd heard in his voice on the phone: fear. I smiled at them both. Calm, easy, genuine. "Come in," I said. "Dinner's almost ready." Cody stepped inside, and his gaze went immediately to the dining room table. I watched him see the album. I watched him read the cover, which Bev had printed in simple letters: Daniel and Elena, April 14th. He looked at me. I held his gaze for 1 second, 2. Then I turned toward the kitchen. "Can I get anyone something to drink?" I said, and the evening began. We ate first. I know that might seem strange, but I had thought carefully about the order of things, and I knew that what I was about to do required everyone at that table to have had a moment of normal: a meal, a glass of wine, the ordinary sounds of silverware and conversation, before the ordinary ended. So we sat. We ate. My mother complimented the chicken. Ruth Ann told a story about an ice storm in Bristol that had knocked out her power for 4 days, and how she'd cooked the entire contents of her freezer on a camp stove in the living room. Tara, who had come after all, talked about her older son's soccer league. Cody was quiet in the way of a man who has been rehearsing something and keeps losing his place. I watched all of it from my end of the table, and I felt, unexpectedly, a kind of peace. This is the last time it looks like this, I thought. This exact arrangement of people pretending everything is fine. After tonight, it will be something different. I don't know if different is better, but it will be true. When the plates were mostly cleared and the candles had burned down an inch, my mother set her wine glass down and looked at me with the expression she had been holding in reserve all evening. "Elena," she said, "I think we should talk." "I know," I said. I was just about to say the same thing. I didn't lead with the documents. I want to be clear about that, because I think it matters. What I did first was tell them about Daniel. Not the facts of him, not the LLC, not the loan, not the building on Merchants Drive, the person. I told them about the Tuesday night phone calls and the running disagreement about Dollywood. I told them about the way he organized his spice cabinet alphabetically and then pretended it was a coincidence. I told them about the last good weekend we had together in October, 2 weeks before his diagnosis, when we drove up to Cades Cove in the Smokies and didn't talk much, just walked the loop and watched a herd of elk move through the morning mist, like something from another world. I told them about the morning I got the call from the hospital, what the nurse said, what I said back, how I sat on the kitchen floor afterward with my phone in my lap and didn't move for a long time because moving felt like accepting it. The table was completely silent. My mother's face had done something while I talked. The careful composure she'd brought through the door had come apart, quietly, in pieces. By the time I stopped talking, she was pressing 2 fingers to her mouth and looking at the table. Cody was staring at his hands. Tara had reached over at some point and put her hand on top of Cody's, and I noticed he hadn't moved to take it. Ruth Ann sat with her coffee cup in both hands, her eyes on me, steady and warm. "He sounds," my mother started, stopped, tried again. "He sounds like he was a wonderful person." "He was," I said. "He was the best person I've ever known." A silence that had some weight to it. "I wish I had known him," she said. It was a small sentence, and I believe she meant it, but I also knew that it wasn't the whole truth of the situation, and I think she knew that I knew, because she looked down at the table right after she said it. "You had the chance," I said, not harshly, just plainly. She didn't answer. I reached under my chair and lifted the folder I had placed there before dinner. I set it on the table. "There are some other things I need to share," I said, "and I want to do it here, with all of you, because I'm done being the only person in this room who knows the whole story." I slid the loan agreement across the table to Cody. He looked at it for a long moment without touching it. Then he picked it up. His jaw tightened. He set it back down. "Where did you find this?" His voice was careful. "Daniel's files. He kept it. He kept everything." Cody looked at the document again, the number on the first page, then he looked at my mother, and I watched something pass between them. Not surprise, but the resignation of people whose shared secret has finally left the room. Cody came to your husband, my mother said slowly, not looking at me. Before I even knew they'd met, he was in trouble with the business. Real trouble. I know what he needed, I said. I've read the whole document. He asked Daniel not to tell you, she said. He was embarrassed. He didn't want you to. Mom, I said it quietly. You signed it. She stopped. You were in the room, I said. You watched my husband lend your son $182,000, and then you came to every family dinner for 9 years, and you looked at him like he was a stranger who'd wandered in. You let Cody make jokes about my life while Daniel was paying for Cody's. The candles flickered. No one spoke. Cody had both hands flat on the table now. Elena, I'm not finished, I said. Still calm, still even. I had promised myself I would stay even. I slid the second document across. The property records for Merchants Drive. Cody stared at it. I watched the moment it landed, the specific moment he understood what he was looking at. He owned the building, I said. For 6 years, Cody. You've been writing that check every month to WB Holdings, LLC, and you never looked up who owned it. I didn't know, he said. I know you didn't. So that means you. He stopped, looked at me. You own it now. I do. His face had gone through several things in rapid succession and had landed somewhere I couldn't quite read. Not anger, or not only anger, something more complicated. The expression of a man who has been walking around for years believing a particular version of events and has just been handed evidence that the version was wrong in a way that changes the whole shape of it. Tara sat very still beside him. She hadn't spoken since dinner. My mother said very quietly, "What are you going to do?" And here was the moment I had thought about the most, the one I had rehearsed in my head 100 times over 2 months, in Daniel's armchair, in my car on the way to Warren's office, lying awake at 3 in the morning with the lamp on because the dark was still too much. I had thought about what Daniel would have done. He would not have called the loan. He was not that kind of man. He had lent the money in the first place because he believed in the principle of it, because someone in his family needed help, and that was enough of a reason. The fact that they had treated him badly afterward was, to Daniel, a separate matter. He didn't attach conditions to kindness retroactively, but he had also written, "I don't want you to keep paying a debt you never agreed to." So I had found the middle. "I'm not calling the loan," I said, "and I'm not changing the lease." Cody looked up. "But I need something from both of you first." I turned to Ruth Ann. She reached into the bag beside her chair and lifted out the wedding album. She placed it in the center of the table the way you'd place something sacred, carefully, with intention. "His name was Daniel Bowman Whitfield," I said. "He was 41 years old. He was generous and funny and precise, and he lent your son money when he didn't have to, and he paid for your silence by being invisible in this family for 3 years." I looked at my mother. "I need you to say his name, out loud. Right now, not to me." My mother looked at the album, at the cover, Daniel and Elena. April 14th. The room was so quiet I could hear the candle flames. She pressed her lips together. For a moment I thought she wasn't going to do it. Thought she was going to find some way to reframe the request, make it about her feelings, redirect it into something she could manage. But she didn't. "Daniel," she said. "Just that. Just his name." Her voice broke on the second syllable. Then, "I'm sorry." She put her hand over her mouth. Her shoulders pulled inward. "I'm so sorry I didn't. I should have." "Okay," I said softly. "That's enough. I meant it. I didn't need the full sentence." The full sentence would have been for her, a way to feel finished. The name was for him. Cody hadn't moved. I looked at him. He was staring at the album cover, and when he raised his eyes to mine, they were red at the rims, in a way I hadn't seen since we were children. I didn't know he was. He stopped. His jaw worked. "That photo you posted, all those people, I didn't know he was that kind of person." "He was," I said. "I was an ass to him." "Yes." He didn't look away. "I was an ass to you." "Yes." Silence. "I don't know how to fix that," he said. "You can't fix it," I said. That's not how this works. But you can be different from here on. That's the only direction available. He nodded once. Small, tight. Tara was crying quietly beside him, and I realized she had been for a while. The evening ended slowly, the way evenings do, when something significant has happened, and no one quite knows how to stand up and put on their coat. My mother helped me clear the table, which she had never done before at my house. We stood at the sink together for a few minutes, and she washed and I dried, and we didn't talk much. At one point she said, "He chose well," and I understood she meant Daniel choosing me, and I said, "I know he did," and we left it there. Cody found me in the hallway before he left. Tara and my mother were gathering their things in the other room. He stood there for a moment like he had something prepared and had lost it. "The building," he said finally, "and the loan. You're really not." "I'm really not," I said. He exhaled. "Why?" I thought about it honestly. Because Daniel didn't build things in order to tear them down, and I'm not going to start. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said something I had not heard from him in so long I had genuinely stopped expecting it. "Thank you. Not for the money. Not for the building." I think we both understood he meant something larger and harder to name. I nodded. He put on his jacket and went out. After they left, Ruth Ann and I sat at my kitchen table with tea and didn't say much. The candles in the dining room had burned all the way down. The wedding album was still on the table where we'd left it, open to a page near the middle. Daniel's sister Bev laughing at something off camera. Daniel in the background watching her with that look he had, that specific look of a person who was genuinely glad to be exactly where he was. I looked at that photo for a long time. He was glad, I thought. Even in the hard parts, he was glad. That was the whole thing about him. That was what I was trying to preserve. "What happens now?" Ruth Ann asked. "I'm going to convert Daniel's house into my studio," I said. "I've been thinking about it since February. The light in that back room is extraordinary." "He always said so," she smiled. "He did. And I'm going to keep the building on Merchants Drive, not to hold over Cody, just because it's mine and Daniel built it, and I'm not giving it away." I wrapped my hands around my mug. "The loan will be forgiven at the end of the year. I'll have Warren handle it quietly, no ceremony." "And your mother?" I thought about her standing at my sink, washing my dishes, saying he chose well in that small, careful voice. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "We're not the same as we were. I don't think we go back to Christmas dinners where Cody makes jokes and she smiles into her wine glass. That's done." I paused. "But maybe we build something else, something smaller and more honest. I don't know if she's capable of it, but I'm willing to find out." Ruth Ann nodded. She looked at the album. "He would have liked tonight," she said. "I think so too." My voice came out steadier than I expected. "He would have liked that it was quiet. He was always suspicious of dramatic gestures." She laughed softly. "He was." We sat for a while longer. The house settled around us, the particular creaking and ticking of a home at night, and I let it be what it was. The sound of a life I was figuring out how to live alone, which was different from the life I'd had, but was still, undeniably mine. It's been 4 months since that dinner. My studio is in Daniel's house now. I painted the back room a deep sage green and put my drafting table under the window where the light comes in from the east in the mornings. His ceramic bowl is on the shelf above my desk. Bev came down from Murfreesboro in May, and we spent a weekend going through the last of his things together, and it was hard and good in the way that only the things that matter can be both at once. Cody and I are not close. I don't know if we ever will be, but he called me in April to tell me he'd landed a big residential contract, a custom build-out in Farragut, and his voice when he said it didn't have that old performance in it, the one that was always really directed at me. He just sounded like a person sharing news. It was a small thing. I'm not making more of it than it is. My mother and I have had 3 lunches, neutral ground, a cafe in the old city we both like. We talk about things other than the family story, which is new for us. She asked about a client project I was working on and actually listened to the answer. I'm watching to see if it holds. I turned 36 in June. Audra took me to dinner at a place on Market Square, and we split a bottle of something good, and she gave a toast that mentioned Daniel by name and made me laugh and cry simultaneously, which felt exactly right. I am not over it. I don't expect to be over it for a long time. Grief doesn't work on a schedule any more than love does, and anyone who tells you otherwise hasn't done enough of either. But I am here. I am working. I am in a room full of good light that belonged to the person I loved, and I am building things, which is what I have always done. The morning I moved my drafting table into the studio, I found a note in Daniel's handwriting tucked behind the baseboard heater. The kind of thing you find in old houses, left by previous inhabitants, except he had only been in this house for 5 years, which meant he had written it recently and tucked it there on purpose, as though he knew someone would be moving furniture. It said, "The light is best between 8 and 10. Don't schedule clients then." I sat down on the floor and laughed until I cried, and cried until I was just sitting there in the quiet, in the morning, in the light that was exactly as good as he had promised. Then I got up. I pulled out my phone and I blocked off 8 to 10 every morning in my calendar. That time is mine, just to sit in the light he left me, just to be here. Some mornings that's everything, some mornings it's enough. I've thought a lot about what I could have done differently. Whether I should have told them about Daniel sooner, fought harder to make them see him, refused to keep that part of my life separate no matter how much easier it seemed at the time. I don't have a clean answer. What I know is that I was protecting something real from people who had already shown me they wouldn't treat it carefully. But I wonder sometimes, if you were in my place, if someone you loved was being dismissed by the people who were supposed to love you, would you have fought harder to make them see? Or would you have done what I did and chosen the quiet life over the hard conversation? I'm still not sure which one of us was right.